Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am your gracious host, Captain Frodo, and what a pleasure it is to have you back here with me again today. Now, I have on my feeds, my social media, I have been seeing some of my friends. One of them, we read a poem by Shep Huntley here the other day. He's an old friend of mine who I'm going to talk a bit more about in the essay later on. But he has reimagined himself as a poet now. There's seeing his creativity find new ways, like we've talked about in earlier episodes. And I also now see another friend, the space cowboy, Shane Hulkren, another pivotal figure in my life, which I also will talk more about today, as I'm going to talk about a show we did together. And he has now started to do painting. And I see this as signs in true artists. In this time of restrictions, when there are no crowds and we can't do our work in the normal way, then our creativity comes out in different ways. And I see in the poetry of Shep and in the paintings of the space cowboy, I see them both developing, finding voices, and who knows where this is going to go. And I think this is a real positive thing about these strange times. New things are being forced out of us that we would not have taken the time for. I have moved to Norway, but that's just a nice way of saying that in terms of statistics, I am an economic refugee from a crumbling industry. Everyone involved in what we do, what I do in showmanship, is completely absent in America at the moment. The industry is going to require a whole new rethinking. So arriving here, although there are some gigs potentials that are coming up, but from the look of it now, with numbers flaring up in tiny compared to America, but the way they're flaring up in Denmark might mean that even going over there just doing 6 shows and then arriving back, I might have to go into a 10-day quarantine from my family and everyone else. So in a way, doing shows with crowds at the moment almost anywhere in the world does have such a risk that it feels like the vestiges of a world from another time, from before the great contraction. And this brings with it this idea of then being a showman. It is not just what I do to get my creativity out. It is also my way of making a living, and it has always been. All the money that I've ever really made has come from doing shows. So when I can't do that, that is always in the back of my mind, and it's always great to make great art. Gauguin, the painter, he basically, as far as I can remember, he just left and abandoned his family, went to live on an island in Tahiti, doing his paintings, and he, there's something about that, the way, because he has in hindsight become very successful and important in art history, that you sort of maybe look at it, it was a meaningful thing to do, to leave your family because you created something important. But if he hadn't become successful, and he wasn't successful at the time, then it would just be this loser attitude of you leaving those people who are depending on you behind and to pursue your career. Or so if it's just a random guy that goes to an island, sleeps with the locals, and makes paintings or writes poetry or puts on poetry readings. I don't know. If you think of that as that's also a pretty bad attitude. So in this, we do have to reinvent ourselves also in ways of making money, and we'll see what happens with that. If I'd like to hear from any of you, whether you'd contact me on social media or you send me an email on thewayoftheshowman@gmail.com. What have you done? What have you done to for money, but maybe more importantly here, I'm interested in what have you done that you wouldn't have done because of the constriction of shows. That's something I'm interested in. Anyway, that's enough talk for today. And the thoughts of the essay are ever expanding. It looks like there might be more than the first 3 episodes in our mythopoetic explorations. So let's, without further ado, just jump into the world of ideas. The Mythopoetic Carnival, Part 2. In this episode we're going to explore the mythopoetics at the lowly carnival, trying to get a bit of a better understanding of what this mythopoetic carnival is, the nature of it, and the heart of the carnival. And we're going back a few years now to when I was working in Stockholm, Sweden, with a show called La Clique. And there I had a conversation with a woman who is a proper multi-generational circus artist from a traditional circus background. And in this conversation I described myself as a Carny. A Carny is someone who works at a carnival. And when she heard this, I could see on her face kind of puzzlement. She was a little shocked. Because in the world of traditional circus, there's a great hierarchical distinction between a Carny and a circus artist. And from my experience, there's also an enormous hierarchy between performers and tent workers or roustabouts in the traditional circus, but that's a whole different story. But from here, from her, it became abundantly clear that a Carny was not an artist. From her whole upbringing, it was clear that carnies and carnivals was very much low life. And from a certain point of view, that is true. Most carnies probably aren't artists. There are artists at the carnival, but there is arguably a more mechanical tone to the whole operation. One less level of artifice or artistry that's colouring the base level of entertainment for cash. In one way, there is probably little difference between someone paying to get to shoot at mechanical ducks in a shooting gallery for the possibility of a prize and a well-crafted circus act performance. But this little difference can make a whole lot of difference, or can make all the difference. And at the end of the last millennium, I was trawling through all kinds of videos and documentaries that I could find about carnivals and freak shows. In the footage and documentaries of which were on VHS tapes, because it was before YouTube and practically before the internet and before DVDs had begun to take over the market, there was this line that kept reappearing in these videos. A stock line repeated by many performers and promoters in different versions and ways. And it doesn't matter what you think of this exhibit or attraction, because we got your money now. And I didn't like that. That line was in many ways a through line of this industry, at least in the American shows, which was the majority of the documentaries. That was what they depicted. This might then be a certain kind of American flavor, but then again, the multi-generational circus woman grew up in the United Kingdom, so the lowness of the carnival might be universal. But this quip, doesn't matter what you think about the act, it kind of betrayed the state of the art for me. Many of the documentaries and the representations of the carnivals was in a nostalgic flavor, like portraits of a dying art form. Every documentary, of course, needs a hook, but it's still portrayed often, maybe by the documentarians, but still enough for me to believe it, that tired performers presenting tired one-dimensional acts, a la, here I have a nail, now I put it up my nose, now I pull it out, for my next trick. But my passion for the carnival arts around this time in the mid to late 90s wasn't dying. It was on the rise. So in a dialectic sense, using the philosopher Hegel's terms, this became the thesis, or it was the thesis that helped me form my antithesis, which eventually led to a new synthesis. And this end of an era feel that I saw helped me crystallize the way that I wanted to present the carnival in my performance and as a sideshow performer. This came into fruition with the Happy Sideshow, which I'll get back to in a bit. But of course in America and then all over the world there was, in the end of the 90s, and it was the Jim Rose Circus Sideshow, which was an amazing revival of the freak show. This show in its first incarnation was absolutely influential on me when I saw it in, I think it was 1993 at the Roskilde Music Festival in Denmark. And seeing them, combined with the fact that I had just that same summer had my nipples pierced by a guy called Hove Fjell, which is an incredible fakir doing pincushion and body suspension performances, getting lifted into the air by meat hooks through your flesh kind of stuff. And he's a fellow Norwegian misfit based in Oslo and has been doing this kind of work for decades now. Yeah, you have to look into his work. I'll post some links in the show notes. And his performances back then in the early 90s had a much more shamanistic flavor than a sort of sideshow thing. And his group was and still is called Pain Solution. Now, people like Hover and the Enigma, Matt the Tube Crowley and the Torture King, Tim Cridlin, the star attractions presented by Jim Rose were pivotal inspirations for my real-world carnival explorations. But coming back to the carnival phenomenon and the sort of mechanical overlay thing, this artlessness of the carnival is maybe found in the fact that many of the carnies are literal mechanics and builders more than artists. And I want to be careful here because artists exist everywhere in every field. And as I'll get back to in the next episode, I love any kind of lowbrow art. But a carny might own a rinky-dink old ride, and is basically just a mechanic selling tickets to people for rides on his machine. Other carnies just sell lottery tickets where you can win slum and stuffed crappy plush toys and maybe a Motley Crue mirror if you're lucky, like we remember from the Bikini Kill lyrics in the last episode. They basically sell you shitty souvenirs by making them prizes in rigged games of chance or straight up raffle ticket sales. There's no skill involved for the proprietors of such attractions. The owner don't even run it. It's run by some pimply kid from the town they arrive in. They do it for the cash with very little thought to the art. The carnival is very much a pragmatic place. The purpose of the Wheel of Fortune is to make money. It uses the inherent human attraction to games of chance and gambling, the allure of winning money or even a prize, as the collateral for the transaction. No fancy overlays. In the heat of the moment, a multi-generational circus princess might snap that there's no heart in a carnival. It's just cheap and tawdry, and carnies have small hands and stink of cabbage. And a circus princess is a very common feature or mode of presenting a female multi-generational circus star, at least in the Danish circuses that I have seen. And I've worked quite a bit in Denmark. Practically every circus there highlights one of their female performers as a real circus princess. And this is not in any way an attempt of belittling anyone. A princess in mythology is also a very important, high-ranking person. Even if Disney has appropriated the term and Disneyfied it, it does not, in my opinion, take anything away from the power of a princess. But this is a path of exploration for another time. And the comment about the small hands and cabbage is a silly quote from the Mike Myers character, Austin Powers, where Austin Powers says, "There are only two things in the world that scares me, and one is nuclear war." And the other character says, "What's the other thing?" Austin Powers says, carnies, circus folk, nomads, small hands, smell like cabbage. But ridiculousness aside, The Carny life for real life Carnies is often hard. A few years ago, a journalist called Nancy Rommelman wrote a captivating article for the LA Weekly about the lives of contemporary present-day Carnies, and the picture she paints shows this lowest of the low aspect in all its tragic beauty. She writes, "Hang around the midway during the day while the carnival is readied, and you'll understand the literal meaning of stayed too long at the fair. The rides and games show the stress of the road, and so do the carnies. Most of the workers washing down booths or bagging cotton candy look as though they haven't showered for a few days. Sweatpants are stained, sweatshirts splotched with circles of motor oil, and there's evident truth behind the fairground joke. What do you get with a room full of carnies? A full set of teeth. In short, everyone looks poor, which they are." The article that she wrote was called Lives of the Carnies. Now, I'll post a link to it. You can still read it online. Post it in the show notes. So, if this is the reality of the carnival, what then is the nature of the Mythopoetic Carnival? Now, one way to understand this that is beneficial for me, coming from a person who's interested in philosophy, is to look at it like Plato's theory of ideas. This is a philosophical theory, concept, or worldview that suggests that the physical world is not as real or true as the timeless, absolute, and unchangeable world of ideas, which exists as a kind of separate reality. It postulates that there is an entire non-physical landscape of forms or ideas, and anything in the real material world is just an imitation or an incarnation of this idea into the world. Behind or inherent in all rabbits lies the idea or form of rabbit. Each rabbit is just an imperfect manifestation of the idea or ideal form of rabbit, like with a capital R. Each incarnation of the non-physical idea rabbit is in a sense limited by being real, by reality pushing and pulling and constraining the possibilities of its full existence. Now, whether this theory of ideas is a real feature of reality is outside the scope of this episode, but for me, Plato's notion that each process, and when I'm saying process, I mean it in the way that we talked about in episode 8, Where is My Art? That our art is a process and not a thing, that both rabbits and carnivals are processes. They're imperfect representations or incarnations, ideas made flesh of an idea or form that has greater potential when it's unhindered by reality's constraints. Another non-physical realm of pure potential and mythic proportions. I think this is a very apt expression of the way I view the nature of the Mythopoetic Carnival. Nancy Rommelman's real-world carnival is only an imperfect representation of the full potential of the idea of the carnival, or the Mythopoetic Carnival. Now, the fact that the lowest of the low is one persistent feature of the carnival makes it attractive as a foundation, which is what we explored in the last episode, because foundations are found beneath your feet, solid dirt and perhaps bedrock, so lowest of the low. And then let's look at if there are some diamonds in the gravel, because the fact that you don't expect to find anything of great significance or value in the low is, to me, more a powerful potential than a flaw. The mindset of someone only expecting to find cheap thrills have their hearts open and their minds open in a certain more unprotected way. They're not protected and guarded like you could imagine a person attending a gallery presenting the latest in contemporary art might be. The trepidation we have approaching conceptual art is a kind of guarding of ourselves. We have mental protections. We have that in all encounters with art. Also for us showfolk, when we first meet our crowd, when we come out onto the stage, they are all wondering whether they will fully accept you and whether they dare to be taken along on the ride with you. But in things like conceptual art, it's even more prevalent. Like, I don't know if you remember the banana that was gaffer taped to the wall for one of the premier art shows in America, the Art Basel Miami Beach. And this was a piece that was called Comedian, and it was the creation of someone called Maurizio Catalan. And the buyers of this banana, because it was sold, and they called the artwork a unicorn of the art world, and they compared it to the Andy Warhol soup cans, and they paid $120,000 for a banana gaffer taped to the wall. There was more to that story of someone eating it and all this that's worth looking into. It's kind of a funny thing. But a banana taped to a wall, that's, as an example of modern art, that's just wacky enough, off the wall enough, to be presented as a carnival attraction. Its title, Comedian, is very much nodding to the craft of showmanship. The banana is the fruit with the highest comedy potential, after all, although when it comes to vegetables, I'd argue that turnip at least has the funniest name. Turnip? I made my daughter laugh hard by saying turnip the other day. Anyway, on the level of carnival attraction, Comedian could be in a funny carnival exhibit. It could be presented as a clown's art piece in a mockery of modern art. And the right showman could probably sell tickets to that, but to understand and value this piece to the sum of $120,000, you need to understand a whole other level of theory and art historic context. To understand it enough to believe it's valuable to this level, you need specialized knowledge. There is something visceral in your gut about a banana taped to a wall, enough to warrant paying $1 at a carnival, but there is something abstract and deeply intellectual about it as well, which, when fully understood, can elevate its value and importance astronomically. And I guess in a sense this Mythopoetic Carnival is similar to the banana on the wall, with all the thoughts and carrying on talking and thinking about it as I have done in my life and that we are doing here right now. I have discovered through this specialized knowledge the abstract, the Platonic carnival. It's completely unimportant for the average American carnival worker, yet I think it can be directly valuable for show folks of all kinds and in all branches of showmanship, for reasons like what we explored last episode in the beginning, like understanding who we are as showers of material, as presenters of ideas in entertaining ways, and also as a wellspring of ideas for creation and the shaping of the material that we present. Now, I want to have a little look at this concept of the lens of showmanship. The Mythopoetic Carnival is the fertile potential of the idea of the carnival. And for us who follow the way of the showman, it is also the way, like the Mythopoetic Carnival, is the way that the world looks like when we view it through the lens of showmanship. And this is, of course, something that I say in the show intro every time, but we've not really spoken about it. But this esoteric knowledge of the Mythopoetic Carnival that we're developing and discovering here is what the world looks like through the lens of showmanship. It is what this lens can reveal for us. Looking through any lens alters your vision, it changes what you see. Some lenses are telescopic, some microscopic, and some kaleidoscopic. And the important thing to remember is that we are looking through a lens. Every human being, all of us, are always looking at the world through lenses of bias and limitation, limited point of views based on our own personal circumstances. But by explicitly stating at the beginning of it all, in each episode, that we are looking through a lens, I hope to lodge it in your mind as I have lodged it in my mind. And there are limitations to looking through lenses at everything, and I'll probably dedicate a whole episode about the pitfalls of make-believe in regards to our mythopoetic explorations in a later episode. But our view of the world is always limited and partial. And along the way of the showman, we use the lens and we focus and adjust its scope so that we can sometimes see the stars, then we adjust it again to see the microscopic, like tardigrades, water bears, moss piglets, and then we adjust it again and are treated to the kaleidoscopic, psychedelic, and possibly even transcendental. All these things can be seen through the lens of showmanship, and it's going to be projects for the next coming episodes. But getting back now to the story of me talking to the circus princess in Sweden, the show that I was performing with, as I mentioned, it was called La Clique. I toured with that gang of people for 12 years, and the life and times with that show was very much a huge influence on me and on who I am. Many people were involved with that show, but as it came to be the worldwide phenomenon that it became, it was first and foremost the work of Brett Haylock, which by now is like a brother for me. But anyway, at the time of the conversation, La Clique was playing its first of 2 seasons in Stockholm, Sweden, at a carnival called Gröna Lund. And the show had gone completely gangbusters, and it was the talk of the town, sold out and packed to the rafters. So that is another strange loop in this, that I had a conversation with a circus princess at a carnival about carnival. Whilst we were performing at this carnival, our acts, hers a circus act, mine kind of a sideshow clowning, and it's all just swirling around there on a carousel. But until she questioned me about this, and it's not like she made such a huge deal of it, it was just for me that it sort of, as we say in Norway, took me on the bed. It took me by surprise. I had not fully thought through why I identified as a Carny. No one had asked me so. But put on the spot, I did manage to account for why, and in that process argue for the recontextualization of this term. Because as I became aware of in that moment, I was using it in a different way than the one that she was thinking of. As at the time, I had yet to discover the full Mythopoetic Carnival. So my identification came from a more real-world place. And I've already traced my love of the carnival and this back to Pain Solution and the American Sideshow Revival, but more immediately, the carnival I was identifying with came from me being part of a subsection of the Australian contemporary circus scene where we did call ourselves or identify as Carnies. And the reason for this was that we were, and some still are, part of creating a carnival unlike the carnival described by Nancy Rommelmann, which is the same kind of carnival that the Circus Princess was thinking of. Our gang of circus misfits and sideshow performers and fringe festival artists had been reclaiming the term of carnival starting at the dawn of the new millennium in the development of the Garden of Unearthly Delights. Every year now, but it was biannual at the time, every second year, in Adelaide for the Fringe Festival in Australia, South Australia, there's a juggernaut of carnival experience happening in a glorious parkland. It's put on by many, but a pivotal player is the pioneering and highly creative team of Strut and Fret, founded and spearheaded by Sarah Stewart and Scott Maidment, both pivotal in me coming to Australia. The Adelaide site is called Rundle Park, And that's what became the Showgrounds. First time it was just used by the famous Spiegel tent, which was owned and operated by the Spiegel maestro, David Bates, who at the time was employing Brett Haylock. And this was pre-La Clique, but it was David Bates and Brett Haylock who started La Clique together. And for the first few years, we only toured in the Spiegel tent. But this was still in the future at the first time here. And soon a kind of carnival grew up around the Spiegel tent the next year and the next year. Things were added, a circus big top that featured the Happy Sideshow, which I'll get back to in a minute, a few food stands, bar tents, and the supremely influential Tony Rook's Tiny Top. Tony Rook is known as the godfather of Australian contemporary circus, and his Tiny Top was basically just a very small sideshow tent. It could maybe fit 50 people. We presented short, sharp sideshow acts, including amongst the stellar lineup the Space Cowboy, which was in the Happy Sideshow, Trent, Birdman, Bowerman, Azaria Universe, and myself. And we talked up a storm outside and drew crowds in, and I used to love the Tiny Top. The intimacy of that was just an incredible place to perform. We performed endless shows in that little tent, and it was in that tent that my fascination, at the time I was very fascinated with the preacher as a character or a kind of showman, and this fascination coagulated into my can stacking legs behind the head act into the Follow Your Dreams act, which I then performed for 12 years with La Soirée. And I wanted in that time to take on this role of the preacher, but after talking sort of hallelujah shtick for a while, I'd not being a Christian and identifying with that, I wanted to express something that was more true to myself. And this is where I found this speech that culminates in the Follow Your Dream message. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, I'll post a link in the show notes to that act. Anyway, from this festival in Adelaide and the Garden of Unearthly Delights grew a kind of movement, a shared sensibility combining sideshow, burlesque, circus, and also then delicious fat-fried food. My friend Tom Flanagan's turned it in. He's become like a donut king now. Popcorn, fairy floss, crazy bands, and eventually also a Ferris wheel and bumper cars and carousels. So I performed for years as a freak show, sideshow performer, and we created a show called The Happy Sideshow together with Shep Huntley, whose poem about the showman we read in episode 8. It was also with the Space Cowboy and Tiger Lil. And we worked together for about 4 years or so, and we did a kind of reinvention of sideshow as a celebration of fun and difference. And this was the synthesis that I talked of using the philosopher Hegel's terminology. In the process of creating and working and performing, we helped shape the way that sideshow was perceived in Australia and the expression that it took on the Australian scene. And this happy vibe, and that name, the Happy Sideshow, almost came as a sort of description of what we wanted to do, and then it just morphed into the name of the show. Because Australia too had a sideshow tradition at the agricultural state fairs in form of sideshow alleys, but we were something different. It was our mission to bring sideshow to the center stage, to make the macabre mainstream, as we liked to say at the time. We took influence from rock and roll, and many of other venues that we were playing around the country in Australia were rock and roll venues, and music festivals as well, some big and some small, because sideshow is certainly a kind of mirror to rock and roll. Sideshow is shock and roll instead of the rock and roll. And before Elvis, crowds would cram into tents to be shocked and horrified, with performers displaying sexuality, the limits of decency where they were pushed. There was physical deformity and intimidating skills, shocking, like the shocking music of rock and roll, with acts like, sword swallowing and human pincushions. And these were the kinds of performances that had people fainting and screaming, and just like at the rock concerts, church-going, decent people would be offended by it, and the parallels are many and interesting. And the two art forms are, I think, hitting the same chords and affording the same kind of resonance in crowds. We loved the carnival arts, and calling ourselves Carnies came from this love. But the carnival that we inhabited was unlike the carnival described by Rommelmann, and the Mythopoetic Carnival is another huge step beyond that as well. And the Mythopoetic Carnival is not anchored in the solid dirt of the outer world. The pegs of its canvas tents and attractions are pegged into the fertile poetic soil of our inner world, of my inner world, where the freaks and the rides, the pumping music and the smiling faces of the carnival patrons take on an otherworldly existence and are representations of deeper human behaviors and tendencies. It has torn itself loose from the real world limitations. I think of it as an otherworldly entity, a non-physical reality existing somewhere in the world between, the midway, in the realm of poetic imagination between reality and fiction, between the world and the human being, between the world and the showman, and between the showman and the crowd. Each one its own flavor of midway, and its own aspect of the midway. It exists at the frontier of the endless conversation between our inner and outer geographies. I am a Carny is a reclaiming of the term. Something that was used as a derogatory term is reimagined and reappropriated. The reality of this carnival is a place of imagination and meaning creation. And then, in another strange loop, the process of performing. In that process, when I am doing a show, I am, in a way, realizing, making the Mythopoetic Carnival real. The kind of imagination we're using is the poetic imagination we talked about in episode 2, which is a participatory process of where the inner geography is in conversation with the real outer geography. The imagery discovered at this frontier that we're discovering here now together in this conversation, at least at first, is nebulous, like the reflective surface on one of those wobbly, wavy mirrors of a mirror maze, grimy from 1,000 touches of sweaty, greasy fingers from children and stumbling people, drunk on beer and high on sugar from clouds of cotton candy, fairy floss on pink paper cone sticks. But by now, at the end of our second episode of Mythic Explorations, I think we are getting to grasp the peculiar nature of this Mythopoetic Carnival through the funfair mirror distortions. As I started to write about the Mythopoetic Carnival, I had no idea that I had so much to say about it, and we will revisit it in at least another couple of episodes. And although it is in a sense talking about what this philosophy of the way of the showman is, because I have throughout my life just been looking at the world in this way, because it is what I do. And as I then began to write, it has all then come together, and this is this sharing of that mythological underpinning for a way of looking at the world. It is, as I said, the lens. And with that, I'm not going to hold you any longer. It would be great if you also could, if you wanted to do something to help me, scroll down and click 5 stars. That is very excellent. Write a review. If you write a review, that is the most important thing that you can do. But I have also that I haven't asked for yet, but that I do with all my podcasts, and my beautiful wife just pointed out that I need to ask you guys to subscribe to my episode. A lot of you are already subscribing, but if you aren't, then click that follow button. I like to be able to say that there are a lot of people who follow the way of the shaman. Apparently having followers is a very good way for growing my podcast and for making people aware of it. It is some part of this algorithm that the internet has. So yes, please subscribe. Please tell your friends. If you could share it on Facebook or share it on Instagram or anything like that, or on TikTok, whatever the children or kids or youth are doing, then that would be very excellent. And with that, all that's left to be said is take care of yourself and those you love, and I hope to see you all along the way.